and so on, which is quite nothing in comparison to the phenomena of the World War II. So basically, but because it's a centenary, so 100 years anniversary of the World War I, we thought it's a very good idea, you know, to make a project with contemporary artists, not another archival project on World War I with the old materials from museums, but new materials, like some kind of reflection from contemporary position, from position now. So, and then now, why did we decide to speak about the World War I is, of course, it was one of the most turbulent and actually decisive moments in Europe's history, and one of the most decisive moments of the 20th century. And World War I changed and marked many things in this time. So, as some historians like to say, the World War I was basically it marked the beginning of the 20th century. So that the 20th century started actually in 1914. And so yeah, as I said, it marked many things. It's definitely a start of the end of Europe's dominance in the world. So Europe was ruined during the World War I as well as during the World War II. So the dominant powers established elsewhere in the world at that time. And it is the beginning of the end of the colonial era of the world. So the world before World War I looked completely different than the world after World War I. It was also somehow the end of the big empires, like in Central Europe, Ottoman Empire and Austro-Hungarian Empire, and so on. And then on the other hand, what's also very interesting, it's even nowadays, it's very hard to define the reasons, the real reasons for the breakout of the World War I. Definitely there is an economic reason, you know, big powers clashed because of the territory, because of the dominance, basically trade routes and so on. But what is also striking is, if we compare it to the time we live in now, is basically the similarity of this period. So in 1914, Europe lived in basically almost 45 years of peace and prosperity, of basically it was a place of free market, it was a place of multinational corporations in terms of economy and so on. It was also a time of big social turmoils among the working class and so on. But between 1871 and 1914, basically Europe was a peaceful place, and there was like a lot of technical developments and so on. Also, I mean, also in photography and also in the other fields of industry. So the world from 1871 to 1914 developed immensely. Yeah, now what we see here is like a little slideshow of 16 artists that are shown in Dome. The exhibition was opened yesterday. And of course we will hear some more of artist talks here in this symposium. So what I want to point out now, what I mentioned is that we decided to present contemporary view of the World War I, and the artists, the contemporary artists reflect these aspects of causes and consequences of this war in a very, very different manners, with very different approaches. So one very common approach is so-called aftermath photography. So revisiting places that are marked with strong historical context of war, so former battlefields and so on. Then also very common approach here on this exhibition is the appropriation of archive materials. So using archives from these periods and basically recontextualizing them and so on. So there are also a little bit more, I would say, documentary approaches. We also have, let's say, very performative approach with Aaron Shandor-Kirli, who will also present his work a bit later. So I won't talk now I won't talk in depth about this approach now. So yeah, I want to say is that like the contemporary photography and contemporary art is very diverse nowadays. Also, this exhibition is very diverse in terms of approaches that we can see, we can trace that, and yeah, and basically also the artists in terms of the content, they have again very different approaches. Mostly, I could say this exhibition contains this anti-military and anti-war idea basically behind it, because thankfully in this period the world somehow came to the consensus that World War I was pretty much not needed. You know, like all the in more or less all places in all countries in Europe nowadays, they agree, be it winners or the losers of the World War I, they agree that this kind of bloodshed was not basically needed in this period, because the world wasn't much different in a way. I mean, the territories has changed, but there was the war didn't make the world a better place actually. And if we compare the World War I to World War II, there was no Marshall Plan after World War I, so there was still huge economic problems and political problems that led to the World War II 20 years after. So also, beside that, what I already mentioned, we wanted to get the insight into the role and development of photography in this period. So the world before World War I has seen enormous technological developments also in the field of photography. But in 1914, when the war started, 35mm film and easily portable cameras were not here yet. I mean, they were not available on the market. So basically the photographers on World War I were still using a little bit more clumsy equipment. And the photojournalism didn't develop yet, as we know it now. But nevertheless, the World War I was one of the first recorded wars on film and on photography. We have enormous archives of old photographs from World War I. It was, in a way, was the first media war, even though it was censored. So basically, when I'm mentioning the photojournalism, there were photojournalists in World War I, but they were heavily censored. Usually the photojournalists were soldiers. They had to be part of the military. Because they didn't let, I would say, independent photojournalists, photographers, journalists to the front line. And it's an interesting information that, for instance, in Paris, that was in period of between 1915 and 1918, was less than 100 kilometers behind the front line. Most of the people didn't have any idea what kind of bloodshed is going on, like only few hills behind the Paris. So the information couldn't penetrate the mainstream media. But there was this other thing. So also soldiers had their own cameras and through some letters, through some testimonies and some photos, we can get now we can get an insight of the scale of the bloodshed in that period. So again, not to forget, of course, the pictures we see around here in this place, and then the slideshow that will be that will start running at around 7 or 8 o'clock tonight. These are pictures from pilots of Austro-Hungarian army, and they're like one of the first examples of aerial photography from that time, and they were made strictly for military purposes. But again, Marko Štepec, later on, he will a curator of this exhibition and curator from Museum of Contemporary History of Ljubljana, will say some more about the beginnings of aerial photography. That is also one of the inventions of this period. So basically, all this material helps us to understand this period better. So they help with preserving memories, and this is also the key element for many artists who are exhibited in this exhibition, in the exhibition in Cankarjev Dom. And then now the other side of the story is, like I already mentioned, is like comparing those two periods, you know, the period now and the period 100 years ago, from a simple reason that the awareness of war, of this quick turn, could be very unexpected. It turned out, like throughout the 20th century, that basically there is no guarantee for peace, and that this is like the undertone in many artworks that are exhibited also in the show. Also in 1913, 1914, most of the people in Europe would not expect that the war like that can happen. Or even more, even when the war was announced, there were lots of people, also lots of intellectuals, who didn't really question the call to arms. They just went because they thought it's going to be just a short war. It will last maybe 3 months, and by the New Year or by the Christmas, everybody will be home victorious. But yeah, that didn't happen that way. So now, when I'm already mentioning the start, the decisive moment of the World War I, this is, as it's put in history, the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo by Gavrilo Princip in June 1914. I would like to invite Darija Petković to the table, because he has his displaying in the exhibition a series of photographs called Sarajevo Reflections, and it has to do directly with this decisive moment, the beginning of the big bloodshed. So, okay. Thank you. That's all from my side. We will elaborate the entire project a little bit more later on when we publish some essays about it on our website. So, okay.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.